When a lonely billionaire sees a waitress gently lift her disabled son to play an old piano. He expects a simple tune, but what unfolds is a moment so powerful, it rewrites all their destinies forever. Emily had always known life would not be easy. She had grown up in a small, dusty town where dreams seemed to get lost before they even began. From a young age, she had learned how to survive. Her father had passed away when she was 10, and her mother, who worked double shifts at a factory, barely had time to breathe, let alone nurture her daughter's hopes. But Emily never blamed anyone. She learned how to take care of herself, how to cook, clean, and smile even when her heart was tired. That's just the kind of girl she was. When Emily turned 20, she fell in love, or at least she thought she did. His name was Trevor. He was charming, confident, and full of promises. He said he wanted to marry her, build a life with her, take her far away from the small town where she felt invisible. When she got pregnant, she was scared, but she was also excited. She imagined a small, happy family, a little home, a crib by the window, morning coffee with Trevor and laughter around the table. But dreams have a way of breaking when you expect them to hold you. When her son Jacob was born, everything changed. Trevor couldn't handle it. The hospital room was quiet when the doctor told Emily that her baby had cerebral palsy. Explained it gently, trying not to scare her, but the words landed like bricks. Muscle stiffness, delayed movement, long-term disability. Emily didn't cry right away. She looked down at her baby, so small and perfect in her arms, and she whispered, "It's okay, I've got you." Trevor left a week later. He said he wasn't ready to be a father, said he'd send money, but he never did. Disappeared from their lives like a shadow in sunlight. Emily didn't chase him. She didn't even ask why. She had Jacob now, and that was enough. Raising Jacob alone was harder than anything Emily had imagined. He couldn't walk on his own, couldn't hold a spoon without struggling, but he had the brightest eyes she'd ever seen. He laughed easily and loved music from the time he could hear it. He used to tap his tiny hands on her chest when she hummed lullabies, and as he grew older, he began to listen to songs on her phone, trying to mimic the sounds. Even though his muscles didn't cooperate, his ears understood music in a magical way. Emily noticed that, and she clung to it like a secret treasure. They lived in a small, one-bedroom apartment above a closed-down bakery. It wasn't much, but it had a roof that didn't leak and a small window that let the sun in. Emily worked at a diner just 3 blocks away, a cozy little place called Maggie's, where the walls were decorated with old vinyl records and photos of smiling regulars. The pay wasn't great, but the manager, an older woman named Nora, allowed Emily to bring Jacob in after school. He would sit in the corner booth with his sketch pad, scribbling music notes while sipping chocolate milk through a straw. Every morning, Emily would wake up at 5. She would carry Jacob into the bathroom, help him brush his teeth, and dress him with gentle hands. Then she would feed him breakfast, usually toast and eggs, and push his wheelchair down the street to school. After dropping him off, she would rush to the diner, tie her apron, and start pouring coffee for early customers. The work was tiring and less walking, fake smiles, aching feet, but she didn't mind. As long as Jacob was okay, she could handle anything. At school, Jacob didn't have many friends. Some kids were kind, but others didn't know how to talk to him. He couldn't run or play games during recess, so he spent a lot of time alone, humming songs to himself. The music room at school had a piano, and the teacher once let Jacob sit at it. His fingers stumbled at first, but then, slowly, he pressed the right keys. He had no training, but something about the sound made sense to him. That day when Emily picked him up, he told her all about it, eyes glowing. "Mama, I want to play the piano," he said. Emily smiled, but her heart ached. She couldn't afford lessons. She couldn't even afford a keyboard. But she didn't want to tell him that. Instead, she said, "One day, baby, I promise." And from that day on, Jacob dreamed of the piano. He started drawing them grand. Pianos, upright pianos, colorful pianos in parks and concert halls. He watched videos of children playing, studying their hands. He memorized melodies by listening again and again. His dream grew quietly, like a flower in the dark, and Emily made sure to water it with every word of encouragement she could find. Sometimes, After her shift at the diner, when the crowd had thinned out and the lights were dim, Emily would lift Jacob from his wheelchair and let him sit at the old upright piano in the corner. The piano was dusty and slightly out of tune, but to Jacob, it was a magical machine. His small fingers would touch the keys, uncertain but full of wonder, and he would play the songs he'd memorized in his mind. The staff would stop for a moment to listen. Even the cook would peek out from the kitchen to hear the soft, clumsy notes. Emily never told Jacob that they were poor. She never said they were struggling. Instead, she turned their life into an adventure. Just in the middle of the story, she would say, "It gets better."
Oh, dear.
But privately, she worried. Their bills were piling up. The rent was due in 2 weeks, and she barely had enough saved. Jacob needed new shoes, physical therapy sessions, and so many things she couldn't give. Still, she smiled every day. She smiled for Jacob. She smiled for the customers. She smiled for the world, because she didn't know how else to keep moving forward. One rainy evening, Emily was finishing her shift when a man walked into the diner. He wore a dark coat and had silver hair combed neatly back. His shoes looked expensive, and he held a phone in one hand, scanning the menu board with sharp eyes. Most people in the diner didn't notice him, but Emily did. She had a habit of noticing people, especially the quiet ones. He took a seat in a corner booth near Jacob, who was doodling in his notebook, humming softly to himself. Emily approached the man with her usual warmth. "Good evening. What can I get you?" Glanced up, then gave a polite smile. "Just coffee, black, coming right up." As she poured his drink, the man glanced over at Jacob, curious. "Your son?" Emily nodded with a proud smile. "Yes, that's Jacob. He's very focused. He loves music," she said. "He's teaching himself piano." The man raised an eyebrow, but said nothing more. Emily brought him his coffee and returned to work, checking on other tables and refilling drinks. But the man kept watching Jacob. Something about the boy's calm concentration. The way he tapped his fingers to a silent rhythm seemed to hold his attention. Later, as the crowd thinned and the rain tapped gently against the windows, Emily walked over to Jacob and whispered, "Want to play for a little bit?" Jacob's eyes lit up. "Yes, please." She wheeled him to the old piano, lifted him gently onto the bench, and sat beside him. Slowly, his fingers found the keys. The notes were soft, a little uneven, but full of emotion. It wasn't perfect, but it was beautiful. The man in the booth stopped drinking his coffee. He turned fully in his seat and listened. Something shifted in his expressions, something like surprise or maybe even awe. He looked not just at the boy, but at the mother beside him, who sat silently, watching her son with a look that held love deeper than words. For a few moments, the diner felt different. The noise faded, the rain grew quiet, and the only sound that mattered was a young boy playing music on an old piano with his mother by his side. When the song ended, the diner returned to normal. A bell rang as someone left. The cook called out a last order. Emily helped Jacob back into his wheelchair and wiped the dust off his hands with a napkin. The man stood up, left a generous tip, and walked toward the door. But before leaving, he paused beside Emily. "He's special," he said softly. Emily looked up, surprised. "Thank you. He needs a better piano." "I know," she replied with a quiet laugh. "Someday." The man nodded once, then walked out into the rainy night, leaving Emily with a strange feeling she couldn't quite name. She didn't know who he was. She didn't know where he came from. But something told her that night would be the beginning of something she never expected. And she was right. The next morning at the diner started like any other. Emily arrived early, tied on her apron, and began setting up the tables. The smell of coffee brewing filled the air, and the clatter of dishes echoed softly through the kitchen. She moved with her usual calm rhythm. But her mind kept drifting to the man from the night before. The well-dressed stranger who had listened to Jacob play the piano and left quietly after saying, "He's special." There was something about him that lingered in her mind. He had spoken with a softness that didn't feel forced. He hadn't looked at Jacob with pity, which many people did. Instead, there was curiosity in his eyes, maybe even wonder. Emily didn't know who he was, but part of her hoped he might come back, if only to hear Jacob play again. Jacob had gone to school that morning in good spirits. He had been humming one of his made-up songs during breakfast and told Emily he wanted to write it down properly that night. She smiled and kissed his forehead. "I can't wait to hear it." By lunchtime, the diner was busy. The tables were filled with regular customers, construction workers, office clerks, a few retirees who came in daily just to chat. Emily moved from table to table, refilling coffee cups, jotting down orders, offering her gentle smiles that always made people feel welcome. It was hard work, but she was used to it. The pace gave her little time to think, until the bell above the front door jingled. In walked the same man from the night before. Emily's heart skipped for a moment, but she quickly composed herself. He wore a dark blue suit today, crisp and clean, and carried a leather briefcase. His shoes were polished, and his hair, though touched with gray, was perfectly styled. He looked around, saw Emily, and gave her a nod before taking the same seat as yesterday, corner booth, near the piano. She approached with her notepad in hand. "Back for more coffee?" she asked with a small smile. The man smiled. "That! And maybe a sandwich today." Emily scribbled the order and brought him his drink. He looked around the diner, his eyes scanning the room with mild interest, then settled back into his seat. "My name's Charles," he said casually. "Charles Wexler." Emily nodded. "Nice to meet you. I'm Emily. That's your son." "Jacob." She smiled proudly. "Yes. He wasn't here this morning. He's in school right now. He usually comes after. Let him play the piano sometimes if it's not too busy." Charles sipped his coffee, then said, "He's talented. Not just for a kid his age, but in a way that's hard to explain. He feels the music." Emily looked down, her voice soft. "It's the one thing that makes him forget about ... everything else. When he's playing, he's not thinking about his wheelchair or how different he is. He's just happy." Nodded thoughtfully, as if he understood that deeply. They didn't speak for a while after that. Emily went to check on her other tables, but her mind kept wondering about this man. Why was he here again? Why was he so interested in Jacob? After Charles finished his lunch and paid the bill, leaving another generous tip, he stood up and walked toward the door. But again, he paused. "If I came back tomorrow, around 4, would Jacob be here?" Emily hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "He would. I'd like to hear him play again." With that, he left. For the rest of the day, Emily's thoughts were restless. She didn't know anything about Charles Wexler, other than the fact that he was polite, kind, and rich. It wasn't hard to tell. The way he dressed, the way he spoke, the way he carried himself, all suggested he lived in a world very different from hers. But he didn't act superior, didn't treat her like a waitress. He listened. That evening, when Jacob arrived, she told him about the man who had come back. "He wants to hear you play again," she said while helping him out of his jacket. "Really?" Jacob grinned. "Did he say that?" "He did." "Do you think he liked my song?" "I think he liked it very much." The next day, at exactly 4 o'clock, Charles returned. Jacob had just finished his homework and was already eyeing the piano, fingers twitching with excitement. When Emily gave him a small nod, he smiled and waited as she helped him into place. This time, Charles didn't sit far away. He pulled a chair close to the piano and listened with quiet attention. Jacob began to play. It was a soft melody, something he had been working on for a few days. His fingers still stumbled now and then, but the feeling in the music was impossible to ignore. Each note came with care. Each pause held a meaning. He wasn't playing a song from a book, he was telling a story without words. When Jacob finished, Charles clapped gently. "That was beautiful," he said. Jacob blushed. "Thanks. I made it myself." "You did?" Charles looked impressed. "You have a gift?" Jacob looked down, shy but pleased. Emily stood a few feet away, watching the interaction with quiet wonder. Charles stayed longer that evening. He asked Jacob about his favorite songs, his favorite musicians, how he learned without a teacher. Jacob explained how he watched videos online, how he drew his own music sheets, how he dreamed of having a piano at home someday. Charles asked questions, not the kind people ask out of politeness, but real questions. Questions that made Jacob light up. And Emily noticed something she hadn't seen in a long time. Her son, so often reserved around adults, was opening up. Not just because someone was paying attention, but because that someone was listening. With genuine interest, over the next week, Charles kept returning. Not every day, but often enough. Each time he spoke with Emily and Jacob, always calm, always polite. Never brought others with him, never acted like he was doing them a favor. He just listened, asked questions, and watched. Then one evening, after Jacob had played a particularly lovely version of Let It Be by the Beatles, his favorite song, Charles asked Emily if they could talk privately. She led him to a small table in the back while Jacob colored in his notebook. Charles took a breath. "I hope this isn't too forward, but I'd like to help." Emily blinked, unsure what he meant. "Help how?" "I want to sponsor Jacob's music education," he said simply. "Lessons, a proper piano, maybe even future opportunities. He has real talent, and with the right support, he could go far." Emily stared at him, her voice uncertain. "Why would you do that?" Charles looked down at his coffee, thoughtful. "Because I believe in investing in people. I've spent most of my life building companies, earning money, making deals. But none of that ever gave me the kind of feeling I got when I heard your son play. There's something rare about him and about you." "I don't want charity," she said gently but firmly. "It's not charity," Charles replied. "It's potential. I see it in Jacob, and I see it in the way you've raised him. You've done so much with so little. Imagine what could happen with just a little more." Emily looked away, her mind spinning. No one had ever said anything like that to her before. No one had offered help without strings attached. She didn't know if she could trust it. But at the same time, she wanted it for Jacob, for his future. Charles saw the hesitation in her eyes. "You don't have to decide now," he said. "Take your time, ask questions, talk to your son." "I just wanted to put it out there." Then he left, just like before, quiet and respectful. That night, Emily couldn't sleep. She sat by the window long after Jacob had gone to bed, listening to the wind outside and thinking about the offer. It felt like a dream. A stranger walks in, hears a boy play a few songs, and suddenly wants to change their lives. It didn't. Make sense? But then again, maybe it didn't need to. She remembered Charles's face, his steady voice. The way he looked at Jacob not with pity, but with belief. She had met many people over the years who offered advice, who gave looks of sympathy, who said things like, "You're so strong," and then walked away. But Charles didn't walk away, kept coming back, kept listening. The next day, she sat with Jacob and told him about the offer, about the lessons, the piano, the future that could be possible. Jacob was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Do you think he really means it?" "I think he does." "Then I think we should say yes." Emily looked at her son. This boy who had known more struggle in 9 years than most people faced in a lifetime, and she saw not fear, but hope. And in that moment, she felt it too. Maybe, just maybe, this was the moment where everything began to change. Not because they had asked for help, but because help had found them through music. Through kindness, through a stranger who saw something special in a quiet boy and his brave mother in a small-town diner. And for the first time in a long while, Emily allowed herself to believe that something good, something truly good, was about to happen. After Emily and Jacob agreed to accept Charles Wexler's help, everything began to feel a little different. It was not that the world had suddenly changed overnight, but it was as if a small light had been turned on in a dark room, one that made everything seem a little warmer, a little more possible. Charles came to the diner the next day with a calm, kind expression on his face, like he already knew what Emily had decided. She looked nervous but hopeful. "We're ready. Jacob and I talked. We'd like to accept your help, if the offer still stands." Charles smiled. "It does." That simple moment felt like the opening of a new chapter in their lives. The next few days passed quickly. Charles had people who were used, to getting things done and soon, arrangements were made for Jacob's first professional piano lesson. A local music school with a great reputation had agreed to take him on. Emily had never imagined her son walking into such a place wheelchair. Or not, but now it was happening. It wasn't charity. Charles made that clear from the beginning. "This is an investment," he said. One evening as he sat in the diner while Jacob played quietly, not just in Jacob, but in something bigger. Something meaningful. Emily didn't know what he meant exactly, but she could tell that Charles believed in it deeply. The day of Jacob's first lesson arrived. He wore his best clothes, nothing fancy, just clean jeans and a shirt that Emily had ironed the night before. His face was glowing with excitement and a little fear. Emily wheeled him through the wide glass doors of the music school. Felt polished and quiet inside. The walls were decorated with photos of famous musicians, some of them in grand concert halls. Others smiling next to pianos that looked older than time itself. A woman with short curly hair and round glasses came. To greet them, "You must be Jacob," she said warmly. "I'm Clara. I'll be your teacher." She bent down to shake Jacob's hand and smiled in a way that made both him and Emily feel safe. The lesson began slowly. Clara asked Jacob to play something he already knew, and he chose one of his favorite melodies. His fingers were a little shaky at first, but as he played, he began to relax. Clara listened carefully, her eyes closed, her foot tapping gently in time with the music. When he finished, she opened her eyes and said softly, "You don't just play music, Jacob, you speak with it." Jacob blinked. "I do." She nodded. "Music isn't just about the right notes. It's about what you're trying to say. And you, my boy, have a lot to say." From that moment on, Jacob was hooked. Every week, they returned to the music school for lessons. Clara began teaching him how to read sheet music properly, how to structure his melodies, how to add depth and emotion to what he was already doing naturally. She pushed him gently, never too hard, but just enough to make him better. Emily watched her son grow in a way she had never seen before. His eyes shone brighter, started composing more at home, scribbling down notes and humming new tunes late into the evening. She sometimes found herself crying quietly in the kitchen, not from sadness, but from relief and joy. For so long, she had only been able to offer him what she could afford: old keyboards, YouTube videos, encouragement from the sidelines. Now he had real tools, and it was making all the difference. Meanwhile, Charles remained a quiet presence in their lives. He didn't interfere. He didn't try to take control. He was just there. Some days, he came to the diner and listened to Jacob play. Other days, he checked in by phone or text. Once, he invited them both to a small concert in the City of Jazz. Performance in a fancy music hall? Jacob had never been anywhere like that before. The lights, the red velvet chairs, the grand piano on stage, it was like stepping into another world after the concert. Charles took them backstage to meet the pianist. "Jacob," he said, introducing him proudly, "this is Mr. Leonard Hayes. He's one of the finest pianists in the country." Leonard knelt beside Jacob and asked him what pieces he liked to play. When Jacob told him about his own compositions, Leonard's eyes lit up. "You compose? That's fantastic. Keep doing that. That's how the world gets new music." Jacob beamed, and Emily couldn't believe this was her life now watching. Her son talked to famous musicians like it was nothing. Watching people see him the way she had always seen him, but with every blessing, there also came worry. Emily had always been careful with her emotions. Life had taught her not to trust good things too quickly. She started asking questions about Charles. Who was he really? Why was he doing all of this? Was there something he wanted in return? One day, while Jacob was at his lesson, she sat with Charles outside the music school and asked him directly. "I need to know," she said quietly. "Why are you helping us, really?" Charles didn't answer right away. He looked up at the sky as if gathering the right words. "I had a son," he finally said. "His name was Adam. He passed away 10 years ago." Emily's heart sank. "So sorry," Charles nodded. "He loved music too, but I was too busy building my empire to really see it. I bought him a piano once, a grand one, but I never listened to him play. I thought success meant money, buildings, deals. Might missed what was right in front of me." Emily listened silently. The pain in his voice was real. "When I saw Jacob," he continued, "when I saw how you lifted him to that piano, how he played, I saw what I had lost. But I also saw something I could still do." He turned to look at her. "This isn't about paying for my past. This is about doing something that matters now, something good. I don't want anything from you. I just want to help Jacob go as far as he can." Emily reached out and touched his hand gently. "Thank you," she whispered. In the weeks that followed, Jacob's music began to change. It became richer, more complex. Clara noticed it too. "He's not just playing now, he's evolving," she said proudly. "Give him time, and he'll be writing pieces that will touch the whole world." One day, Clara arranged for Jacob to perform at a student recital. It was nothing fancy. Just a gathering of students and their families in the school's small auditorium. But for Jacob, it was his first performance in front of a real audience. He was nervous. Emily could see it in the way his fingers fidgeted in his lap, the way he avoided eye contact. She knelt beside him backstage and held his hand. "Don't worry about the people," she said softly. "Just tell your story through the keys. That's all you need to do." Charles was there too, sitting in the front row. He gave Jacob a thumbs up as the boy was wheeled onto the stage. There was a hush in the room. Jacob adjusted himself, took a breath, and placed his fingers on the keys. Then he began to play. The room filled with a soft, haunting melody that seemed to float through the air like a dream. It wasn't loud or showy, it was gentle, full of heart. Each note told a piece of Jacob's journey, his struggles, his dreams, his quiet strength. People stopped breathing. Some wiped away tears. By the time he finished, the room was silent for a full 5 seconds before the applause broke out. Emily cried. Charles stood and clapped the loudest. Later that night, after the performance, Jacob asked his mother a question as she tucked him into bed. "Do you think I could really become a real musician?" She smiled, brushed his hair back, and whispered, "You already are." Jacob smiled and closed his eyes. For the first time, he truly believed it. And in that moment, Emily knew they had stepped into a new world, a world where dreams were no longer locked away behind doors of fear and poverty, a world where, thanks to kindness and music, anything felt possible. The story was far from over. But for the first time, they were no longer surviving. They were beginning to live. Days after the performance, something began to change inside Jacob. Before that recital, he used to play because he loved it. Now, he was playing because he believed in it. I had felt the way the room had gone silent when he played. He had seen people wiping tears from their eyes. For the first time in his life, he saw himself not as a boy in a wheelchair who liked music, but as someone who could touch people through it. Emily watched him grow, not just in skill, but in confidence. His mornings were no longer lazy or tired. He woke up early, practiced piano before breakfast, and talked about music all the time. The tiny apartment still looked the same, but the energy inside had changed. The walls, once filled with silence, were now filled with melodies. Charles remained close to them, but he didn't control anything. He simply watched with quiet pride as Jacob continued to surprise everyone. One afternoon, he came to visit them. After Jacob had finished a new piece, "I want to show you something," Jacob said, pulling a sheet of paper from under a stack. It was a handwritten composition. The notes danced across the page like a language of their own. "I wrote it for my mom," he said. "I call it her hands, because every time she lifted me, it was like wings." Emily was speechless. Looked at her son, her throat tight with emotion. Charles smiled deeply and nodded. "This needs to be heard," he said softly. Not long after that, Clara, Jacob's piano teacher, suggested they make a video of him playing. She had contacts at a local production studio, and with Charles offering to cover the cost, they quickly arranged it. On the day of the recording, Jacob wore his nicest shirt, and Emily carefully fixed his hair. He looked nervous, but proud. The studio was a small room with soft lights and perfect sound quality. They placed a camera in front of the piano and let Jacob do what he did best. When he began playing her hands, there was no doubt about how deeply the piece came from his heart. It wasn't just music. It was a story, an emotion, a message of love. After the recording was done, Charles asked Jacob if he could share the video online. Jacob agreed, thinking it might get a few hundred views, maybe even a few kind comments. But within days, the video exploded. People from all over the world began watching. They left messages like, "This boy plays from the soul. I cried listening to this. You can feel the love in every note. Thank you, Jacob. I needed this today." News stations picked up the story. Disabled boy's tribute to his mother goes viral became a headline on multiple platforms, reporters called. Local radio shows invited them for interviews. People wanted to know more about the boy who played like he had lived 100 lives. Emily was overwhelmed. She had never imagined their small, quiet world would suddenly be seen by millions. And Jacob, he took it all with quiet grace. He still woke up early, still practiced, still smiled shyly when someone praised him. But now his eyes held something new: purpose. One day a call came from New York City. A representative from a famous youth symphony orchestra had seen Jacob's video and wanted him to come perform at a special benefit concert. The concert was meant to raise money for music programs in schools, and they believed Jacob's story could inspire thousands. Emily was stunned. "New York," she repeated. Charles smiled. "I'll take care of everything," he said. "Flights, hotel, everything. You just say yes." They said yes. When the day of the trip arrived, it was like a dream. Emily packed Jacob's clothes carefully, including his best suit. Charles flew with them in a private jet, something Emily had only seen in movies. Jacob looked out the window, speechless, watching clouds float by like slow-moving ships. In New York, the streets buzzed with life. The hotel was grand and elegant, with high ceilings and sparkling chandeliers. Jacob had never seen anything like it, but what excited him most was the piano at the concert hall. It was a Steinway grand piano, shiny, majestic, perfect. When he touched its keys during rehearsal, he whispered, "It feels alive." The night of the concert, the hall was packed. People from all over had come. Some had heard of Jacob's story. Others were there simply to support the cause. It was his turn. Jacob was wheeled onto the stage under a gentle spotlight. The host introduced him. "Our next performer is a young composer with a big heart. Please welcome Jacob Matthews." The applause was loud, but Jacob didn't seem nervous. He closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and began to play her hands. There was something magical in the room. The way the notes filled the space, the way the melody seemed to speak directly to each person's heart. Even those who didn't know his story could feel it. When he finished, the room burst into a standing ovation. Backstage, people hugged him, shook his hand, asked for photos. A woman in tears told Emily, "Your son reminded me of my mother. Thank you for raising him with such love." The next morning, they appeared on a morning TV show. The host was warm and kind, asking Jacob about his music, his dreams. When she asked him what he wanted to do next, he replied softly, "I want to write music that helps people feel things they can't say." Charles watched all of this with quiet joy. For him, it wasn't just about Jacob's success, it was about redemption. Finally doing something that mattered with his wealth. He had built towers and companies, but nothing had touched his heart the way this boy's music did. One evening, back at the hotel, Charles sat with Emily on the balcony. "Looking over the city, he said, I never really believed in fate, but meeting you and Jacob changed something in me." Emily nodded. "Maybe it wasn't fate. Maybe it was just kindness finding its way." He smiled. "Maybe both." But even in the middle of success, life doesn't pause. Jacob began to feel pain in his hands after long hours of practice. At first, he ignored it. Then one day, he dropped a pencil and his fingers couldn't pick it up. Worried, Emily took him to the doctor. Tests were done. The doctor explained that because of Jacob's condition, too much strain on his hands could cause serious problems. He needed therapy, rest, and possibly surgery down the line. Jacob was crushed. He didn't say much on the way home. That night, Emily found him sitting silently at the piano, his hands on his lap. "What if I can't play anymore?" he whispered. She knelt beside him. "Even if you've never played another note, what you've already done is more than most people do in a lifetime. But I don't want to stop. You don't have to. We'll find a way. Slower, smarter, safer. Charles brought in a specialist. A therapist began working with Jacob 3 times a week, helping him strengthen his hands gently. He also taught him voice dictation software so Jacob could compose music using his voice, reducing hand strain. At first it felt strange, but slowly, Jacob adapted, and he began to write again. His next composition was called The Pause. It was soft, slow, and full of quiet spaces. It didn't scream or shin, it whispered, but it was beautiful. Even more than his earlier works, it felt mature, thoughtful, as if Jacob had learned something deep from his pain. Charles suggested they create an album. Not for money, but as a legacy or record of Jacob's music, his journey. They gathered recordings of all his compositions, and the album was named Wings and Keys. When it was released online, it went viral once again. People wrote in saying the music helped them through grief, heartbreak, anxiety. Father wrote that his daughter had started playing piano again after listening to The Pause. Soldier said the album helped him sleep for the first time. In weeks, Jacob was moved. He'd never set out to change lives. He just wanted to play. One evening, he said to Emily, "Do you think Dad would be proud?" She smiled through her tears. "I think he'd be in the front row at every concert." She believed it. Jacob's journey was far from over. There were still challenges, physical, emotional, creative. But now, he had a team. He had love. He had purpose, and he had music. The music didn't just belong to him anymore. It belonged to everyone who had heard it, felt it, been touched by it, and that, Emily realized, was the most beautiful part. She looked at her son, seated at the piano, his fingers slowly moving again, soft melody floating through the room, and, for the first time in her life, she wasn't just hoping for tomorrow, she was looking forward to it. Life had taken a beautiful turn for Jacob, Emily, and even Charles. After everything they had been through, the struggles, the small apartment, the long shifts at the diner, the piano practice and quiet corners, the world had finally opened up for them. But the truth about life is that no journey is ever complete. There's always more to face, more to feel, more to learn. After the release of Jacob's album Wings and Keys, life became busier than ever. There were emails, messages, invitations, and even letters sent by post from faraway places. People wanted to hear Jacob perform. Schools wanted him to visit and talk to children. Music teachers asked for permission to use his songs in their lessons. Some people just wrote to say thank you. One woman wrote, "Your music saved me from giving up." Another said, "I've played piano for 20 years and never cried while playing until I played your song, The Pause." Jacob read every single letter. Sometimes he cried, sometimes he smiled, but every letter made him feel more connected to people he had never met. He no longer saw himself as a boy in a wheelchair who just happened to play piano. He now felt like someone who had something to give, and he wanted to give even more. Charles continued to help in every way possible, not just with money, but with care. He never forced his ideas, never controlled anything. He had become more than just a rich man helping a boy. He had become family. Often, when Jacob practiced, Charles would just sit quietly in the room, sipping tea and smiling. Sometimes, when Jacob took a break, they would talk not about business or success, but about feelings, fears, and dreams. But the biggest surprise came one afternoon. When Charles asked if he could speak to Emily alone, they sat on a bench in a quiet park. The sun was warm, the breeze gentle. "I've been thinking a lot," Charles said slowly, "about time, about family, and about regrets." Emily looked at him, curious. "I've spent most of my life chasing numbers, profit, deals. I built companies, bought properties, collected things. But nothing ever stayed with me until Jacob. Until you." Emily didn't know what to say. Charles continued, "I don't want to miss another chance. I want to adopt Jacob, not to take him away from you. Never, but to give him my name, my protection, my love. I want to be his father, officially, not just in feeling." Tears filled Emily's eyes. She never thought this day would come. She had raised Jacob on her own, held him when he cried, lifted him when no one else would. And now someone wanted to stand beside them, not in pity, but in love. They talked for hours. And when they told Jacob, he was quiet for a moment, then said, "Will I have 2 last names now?" Everyone laughed, but his eyes were soft and full of emotion. "Yes," Emily said. 2 last names, because your heart is big enough for both. The adoption process was simple because Jacob was still a minor, and Emily gave full consent. Within a few months, Jacob officially became Jacob Matthews Hartman. Charles threw a small celebration at their home place, much bigger than their old apartment, but still filled with warmth. Clara, the piano teacher, came. The music therapist came. Even some of the regulars from Emily's old diner job showed up, bringing hugs and gifts. But amidst all the joy, life threw them another challenge. Jacob had a checkup for his hands, and the doctors noticed something new. His spinal condition, which had been stable for years, showed signs of progression. There was pressure on the nerves that could, if untreated, cause partial paralysis of his arms. The word paralysis struck Emily like a hammer. She had heard it before, but she thought they had left it behind. Now it was back like an old ghost knocking at their door. The doctors recommended surgery. It was risky, but without it, Jacob might slowly lose the ability to play altogether. When they told Jacob, he was silent. His fingers, which had brought music to so many, were now at risk again. He asked only one question: "Will I still be able to feel the keys?" The doctor answered honestly, "We'll do everything we can." The days before the surgery were long and quiet. Jacob didn't practice much. He mostly sat by the window, thinking. Emily stayed close, always nearby, her heart heavy but hopeful. Charles brought the best surgeons, the best hospitals, and even a specialist from Europe to consult. The night before the operation, Jacob asked to go to the piano one last time before the procedure. He played a simple tune. Not complex, not fast, just slow, soft notes. It was not a farewell. It was a promise. A whisper of hope. "I'm not saying goodbye to music," he told his mother. "I'm just taking a break." The morning of the surgery was calm. The hospital staff was kind. The lights bright, the air filled with quiet tension. Charles and Emily waited in the hallway, holding hands. For hours, they heard nothing. Every time a nurse walked by, Emily held her breath. Finally, the surgeon came out. His face was tired but smiling. "It went well," he said. "Jacob is a fighter." Emily broke into tears. Charles let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. Recovery took weeks. Jacob had to wear a neck brace and avoid any strain. His hands were weak at first, but slowly, with therapy, patience, and stubborn determination, they regained their strength. The first time he touched a key again, he looked up at Emily and smiled. "Still feels like magic," he said, after he recovered. Jacob surprised everyone by announcing that he wanted to start teaching. "Teaching?" Emily asked, surprised. "Yes," Jacob said. "There's so many kids out there who don't think they can do anything because they're different. I want to show them they can." With Charles' help, they opened a small music school in their city. It wasn't fancy. It's just a few rooms, a few instruments, and a lot of heart. They named it The Lift, inspired by the moment Emily had lifted Jacob to the piano. The name stood for more than physical help. It was about lifting dreams, lifting spirits, lifting lives. That kids came from all over. Some in wheelchairs, some with learning differences, some just shy or broken in ways the world couldn't see. The way Jacob taught each one with patience, kindness, and understanding. Didn't just teach notes. He taught hope. Emily became the heart of the school, making snacks, encouraging the kids, sharing her own story. Charles helped with funds, but he also sat in on classes, often clapping with childlike joy when a student played their first full song. Years passed. Jacob grew into a young man. He still played, still composed, but more than anything, he lifted others. His name became known in music circles, not just as a pianist, but as a mentor, a teacher, a light. One day, a student came to him and said, "I heard your first song, the one called Her Hands. I played it for my mom. She cried and hugged me. She said it helped her understand me better. Jacob just nodded. He didn't need fame. That one moment was enough. Emily, now older, still came to every recital. She sat in the front row, always in the same seat, always with the same proud smile. One night, after a performance, Jacob walked up to her and said, "You're still my biggest lift." She laughed through her tears. "And you're still my wings."
Ah!
Charles eventually retired from business completely. He spent his days at the school, mentoring young musicians, playing chess with the kids, and sometimes writing little poems that he pinned on the wall. And even though the world had changed around them, their bond never did. The boy, the mother, and the billionaire who found a second chance at family. Sometimes, miracles don't look like lightning or gold. Sometimes they look like a tired waitress lifting her son to a piano bench. Sometimes they sound like a melody that makes strangers cry. Sometimes they begin with pain but end with purpose. And in a small music school named The Lift, the miracle continued to grow because love once found never stops playing.